Hey guys, today I'm doing a power jack replacement on an Acer Spin 3 laptop. This has a bad connection where you plug in the power cord and needs to be replaced. And the first step here is to add some flux to the solder points. I'm using MG Chemicals No Clean Flux Paste. I'll put the link in the description. And this is going to help break up that old existing solder that's already on the board. This is probably the most difficult part, is to get the removal done properly. Those jacks are not made to come out easy, and this, especially with these Acer Spin ones and these style of computers, the port is very small and delicate, so you want to be really careful with the soldering iron. And what I'm doing here now, after I add the paste, this is going to add some fresh solder. This is also going to help break up the existing solder that's in there, get those through holes flowing, and makes for a much easier removal process. If you try to go at it with just the braid without doing any kind of flux or solder, it's going to be extremely difficult or basically impossible to get that solder out. And so here I'm taking the braid to each one of the through holes. I'm trying to get this thing nice and heated up. My soldering iron runs typically right around 700 degrees Fahrenheit. And especially with these thin motherboards, delicate motherboards, you don't want to go any higher than that. That's plenty of heat to get that solder flowing. And keep in mind, sometimes you have to do this multiple times. There's repairs that I do that it can take up to 3 times of adding solder, adding flux, getting rid of the old solder with the braid, and then just repeating that process again. Sometimes it comes out really smooth and easy, and sometimes, like I said, it takes about 3 times or whatever. It can be a little bit more difficult. And these days I've just been switching to the hot air once I remove most of the solder. Just makes for a really easy removal process, which you'll see later in the video. And if this is something that's out of your tech comfort zone, I do this repair for $69 parts and labor, and if you need return shipping, there's an additional $30 for that. And all the information is on my website in the link in the description. That's at pcrepairhelp.net. And as you can see, the solder is coming out relatively good here. There's ones that I've worked on recently that, just no matter how many times I do the adding flux, adding solder, and then putting the braid on, I just can't get the solder out, and that's when I have to switch over to the hot air soldering station to do the final removal of it. But at any rate, you want to try to get as much of this solder out as possible with this technique. And sometimes once you do this, the jack will be loose enough where you can kind of wiggle it out, or sometimes you need to switch to the hot air station to get that final enough heat to get that final removal. But if you have any questions about the whole process, leave a comment down below. I can answer you pretty quick if you're having issues or having troubles with this thing. And now what I typically do is you want to flip the motherboard over, and you can start to desolder from the other side too. Some laptops you can do this pretty easily on, some laptops it's impossible, so it depends on the model whether you can flip it over or not, but these 2 big support pins on the front of the jack are very easily accessible to do the desoldering part as well. And another thing that I see people run into as far as problems go is you want to make sure that you have that flathead style tip on your soldering iron. Typically when the soldering iron comes with the little pointy tip that you kind of classically see with a soldering iron, those just really are not good for this type of through hole repair. These holes are typically like a rectangular through hole, and that chisel tip or flathead tip, whatever you want to call it, is really good for getting, it lays across that through hole, the same design, it's like that flathead style. So making sure you have that tip is really helpful too. And what I just did there is I checked it after I did the desoldering. You know, it's not loose enough for it to come out on its own. You never want to force that thing out. And so here I'm just cleaning up the flux that was on there. But you never want to try to rip the jack out or force it out. You can damage the through hole, you can crack the motherboard. It's something that has to come out really, really easily. And I'm using 99% alcohol to clean the flux off of there. You don't want to use a 70 or an 80% that you typically find at your drugstore. You want to make sure you get a special 99% that's for electronics. And here I'm taking some Kapton tape, and I'm just going to put the Kapton tape. This is for heat resistance. I'm going to put that over the circuitry there that's close to the jack. I'm using the hot air station now to heat up this jack, heat up the through holes to remove it. And this is going to be much easier once all the solder is removed. If you try to do it without doing the first step there, it's going to be kind of difficult. It could still work just fine, but you might take more time. And I try to minimize as much time as possible with that hot air over the board. You know, you always run a chance of damaging something. And that's what that tape is for. That tape will protect that precious circuitry next to the jack. And I typically run the hot air around the 350 to 400 degree mark. And once half of that solder is removed, as you can see here, it's going to come out really easily, really quickly, and that reduces the time of me having to use the hot air. And as you can see, all those holes pretty much have almost no solder in them, but you do have to get them pretty clean. You know, even just the slightest amount of solder can obstruct that new jack from going in properly. So after the hot air station, I'll take a little bit of flux and solder if I need it, and see if I can get the jack in, and if I can't, I'm going to have to do a little bit more desoldering of it. Right now I'm just checking to see if I can get that new port in there, if it'll go in nice and easy. And you can tell that jack will be nice and flush with the motherboard. I'm putting that plier handle underneath there to make it stay flush. If you just lay it down on your workstation, that jack can kind of move around and fall out, and then it won't be all the way through those through holes. And you want to make sure that you have something underneath it potentially if you need it to keep that jack level. So I'm just trying to carefully prop it up to make sure that it's all the way through, and I don't solder in a jack that's slightly at an angle or not all the way in. When you put it back together, that power cord might not go in properly if it's not all the way flush with the board. And this one was kind of being a pain. I was trying to find something I could put underneath it to make it flush. This thing just really does not want to stay in there properly. Another option, what you can do is put a bunch of flux on the through holes and then stick the jack in there. That can kind of help hold it in place too. And here I'm just doing some more desoldering. I think part of the reason that jack wasn't staying in properly, or I couldn't get it all the way in, was because there's still some existing solder left in the through hole. So just adding some flux and going over it again with the braid can just remove that last bit of solder that's stuck in there. Like I was saying before, even just a little bit of solder will make that jack not go in properly. So you never want to force it in or force something that's not working. If you find it's not fitting properly, then you need to go back and repeat the process and do some more desoldering. Alright, so I finally got it in level there. Oh, one more touch. And now you can just resolder those through holes with the new jack installed. You just want to make sure you get that solder flowing all the way through the through hole. It should come out a little bit on the other side potentially, just to make sure you have a good connection. You don't want it to just be sitting on the top and then have nothing on the other side. It'll just help help it have a long life. If it's kind of only halfway in there, then the act of unplugging and plugging over a time period is going to make it come loose again. I'm just going over that back voltage pin and all the other pins just to make sure I got that solder flowed through all the way. And now I'm just going to flip the motherboard over, and just the same as the desoldering process, the soldering process needs extra solder on the other side too. So I'm going to put some solder on that back voltage pin and then some solder on the sides there. And I'm also going to take that 99% alcohol again and clean this thing up. Just want to get all the old flux off of there so it's a nice clean circuit. And this thing is all set to go and ready for reassembly. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, just leave a question down in the comment section and I'll get back to you as quick as I can.